Welcome to this. Welcome. I'm Jacob Reynolds. I'm head of policy at MCC Brussels, the think tank in Brussels, as well as being an associate fellow at the Academy of Ideas. I can't resist. It's been a long weekend and it's late now on the Sunday. I have to note that this panel, Damsels in Distress, the Women's Safety Dilemma, has been allocated to me, a man, to keep order. Which I'll try to do, but probably fail to do. But this is a really, really important discussion. I was glad to be asked to keep the peace, as it were, on it. It's I remember when I first started coming to the Battle of Ideas Festival, and there would be debates on issues like this and women's safety, and it was certainly an issue very much monopolised by what is now the kind of identity politics-driven left of the kind of campus culture war variety. And now the women's safety issue has certainly become something that people on a wider spectrum of the political debate are very much interested in. In the blurb for this discussion, we note, of course, the tremendous change in the public debate that's come around as a result of the issue of self-ID and effectively men in women's spaces, which we're definitely going to get onto. But also it's got taken up by those on the right in relation to pressures around migration and asylum and the worries that people have over the kind of culture clash that results from importing large numbers of people into this country who might not have the same ideas about sexual conduct as the rest of us. But anyway, there's lots and lots for us to pick into, and it's definitely not my place to really unpick these issues, but we've got a wonderful panel to do that in my stead. I'll introduce them to you briefly in the order that they're going to speak. So speaking first, we've got Laila Cunningham, Reform Westminster City Councillor, former senior Crown prosecutor. If you are familiar with TV, radio debates, you'll have seen Laila a lot. She's been a very impressive voice for reform and indeed just on a variety of really important issues. I'm really delighted that we've managed to nab her for this panel. Laila, thank you. And then sitting next to me, or speak next, is Dr. Julia Long. She's author, women's rights activist. I think she's probably known to many, if not all of you in this room, as a pretty forthright and uncompromising voice on issues related to women's rights and safety. So we give her a warm welcome. Then speaking on my far left over there is Joan Smith, author and columnist. She's been writing, and I've enjoyed catching up with her work in preparation for this event, writing in a wide variety of outlets. Again, a little bit like Julia, probably known to you as a really important voice in the debate on all issues related to feminism and its contemporary forms and the challenges and contradictions that come up around it. So can we give her a big welcome? And then we'll be hearing from Ella Whelan, who's the co-convener of the Battle of Ideas Festival, my colleague at the Academy of Ideas, journalist, author of a book called What Women Want, Fun, Freedom, and an End to Feminism. She's a tireless voice, campaigner, advocate, debater on the telly and radio, and of course, as I said, my colleague. I'm delighted she's on the panel. Hello. Okay, we'll have introductory remarks of about 5 to 6 minutes. I'll try and be relatively stern on keeping people to time, and then we'll very much in the spirit of Battle of Ideas Festival debates be coming out to you, the audience. We've got a big crowd, so I expect there's going to be a lot of questions and comments to get through, so we'll keep things as brief and fast-paced as possible. But without any further ado, Laila.
Thank you. Thanks for coming. Women do face danger, and it's not because we're helpless. It's because we are women. That's a fact. It's biology, and the first duty of government is to protect us, but they haven't. They've failed us. They've betrayed us. They've failed to protect. They've failed to prosecute. They've failed to control our borders. They've failed to police, and they've even failed to protect our little girls. Let's not forget, they didn't just fail to prosecute rape gangs. They let grooming gangs operate for years. They looked away. They covered it up. They told us that a man who identifies as a woman is the same as us. They put biological men in our changing rooms, in our prisons, and they called that inclusion. It wasn't inclusion. It was deletion. They stripped away our rights, our spaces, our boundaries, our language, and they told us to be silent or be labeled hateful. Let's be clear. Danger doesn't come from women being weak. It comes from the state being weak. We're not only fighting men. We're not only fighting rapists, I'm so used to being called that it just comes out of my mouth. We're fighting an establishment that doesn't think we are worth protecting. The state didn't just look away when the girls were raped in Rotherham, Rochdale, Telford, and many others. They covered it up because they were scared of being called racist. They sold out our British girls, to protect their votes. For me, that makes them complicit. And if you call it out, you're called divisive and bigots. Well, let me say this, and I've alluded to it before. If telling the truth makes me a racist, makes me a fascist, makes me divisive, well, I'll wear that badge of honor, because it's not just about crime. This is about power, entrenched establishment power. Tories, Labour, same script, same failures, same contempt for ordinary people. They allowed unvetted men to pour into this country. They housed them next to schools, next to families, next to girls. And when we objected, we were told we are the problem. That's not safety, that's deliberate neglect. They knew the risk. They ignored it. And they call you racist for calling it out. Meanwhile, prosecutions have collapsed. I was a prosecutor, I know. Police are invisible. The border's a joke. And still, they tell us women to be careful, to change our routes, to download another app. No, how about you, the government, do your job? I was a prosecutor. I know how the system is broken. I've seen the cases buried, domestic abuse, sexual abuse. The victims are silenced and the criminals are set free with a suspended sentence. And now they want us to shut up again in the name of progress. This isn't about left or right anymore. It's about fighting entrenched power. Tories, Labour, it's the same cartel. They want a public that's too scared of prosecution to ask questions. An establishment too scared of accountability, because when the truth comes out, ladies and gents, a few gents, not many, their house of cards falls. Because the fight is not left or right, ladies and gentlemen. It's us. It's people versus the political class. And if the political class won't protect us anymore, it's time they get the hell out of the way and let a new one protect us.
Thank you. Great, thank you, Laila.
What's that?
Julia, pardon?
Was I below my minutes?
You were below your minutes, yeah, that was one.
Hang on. Yeah, thanks you.
I've already lost control. Come on, Julia.
Yeah, thanks very much. So before I start, I just felt I did want to take issue with the title. I was very pleased to be invited to come and speak, but I don't think we can let a title like Damsels in Distress go like uncommented on. Obviously, the fact that we have this trope of the damsels in distress is a massive part of the problem, because as writers like Andrea Dworkin were saying, 40, 50 years ago, the kind of cultural myths and legends and fairy stories that we imbibe from infancy give us this idea of damsels in distress or wicked witches or nagging wives or happy hookers a bit later on, all of these kinds of things. And clearly they're really damaging. And I think it's a real mistake to hive off ideas of women's safety as if they can just be contained within a particular criminal justice or, whatever framework without looking at much wider cultural issues. So, clearly if it would have been called like, they would never call it gentleman distress, they'd call it something like the crisis of masculinity, and then we all have to take that very seriously, don't we? Yeah, as we heard earlier this morning. So I wanted to mention that, but also I think it's really interesting that it was also subtitled Women's Safety, because I just wonder how we, the women in the room here, how did we become so unambitious? Because 50 years ago, we were talking about women's liberation. The language was a very political language about our liberation. It identified men's violence against women within that much wider context of male domination, and everything was up for analysis and up for action. It wasn't just this kind of hived off specific area. And I noticed when I was working in the domestic violence field myself, how this kind of language of health and safety has taken over once, which was a very political movement for women's liberation, is now seen as things like healthy relationships or safe choices. It's become very limited and sanitized. And I think it indicates I think it indicates a lack of ambition. And I wonder where that's come from. Well, I think perhaps the fact that we've had to spend 10 years even defining what a woman is, because all the political parties, perhaps one, all the political parties, apart from Party of Women, definitely, have been very either completely against us in that, and were very, very quick to demolish our rights, or to make inroads to demolish our rights, and to allow men into our spaces, all the kinds of things that Laila's just outlined. So we've had to waste our precious time and give yet more unpaid labour to basically uphold a fact that everybody knows is true in the first place. And most of us have either lost jobs, or been assaulted, or been threatened, or had all kinds of disgusting misogynist insults for our pains. So anyway, I would like to get back to that greater ambition of the women's liberation movement. And I think I did hear certainly some of the spirit of that come from Laila's introductory remarks. In the 1970s, the women's liberation movement, through a series of conferences, I know some of the women here would have been there, developed 7 demands, and the last one of those was the demand about the demand to end male violence. That was brought about in 1978, and I'd just like to read you that, because I just think it shows like how our movement has been totally stalled, and we're just going round and round having these same debates. Like the problem of men's violence against women, problem is rather an understatement. The catastrophe of men's violence against women has not just happened in recent years with the problems of migration and the kinds of things that Laila was talking about. It was a fundamental mobilising impetus for the women's liberation movement, and I'd like to get it back into that political frame and think about what we're actually what we're talking about. So during the 1970s, women set up the first women's refuge. I think Erin Pizzey, that was 1971, followed by others. Rape crisis centres, I think around 1974. All the activism of the 1980s. It was such a key, maybe the central part of the women's liberation movement was the WAVOR groups. I know I'm talking to some women who were involved in those. Women Against Violence Against Women. They were in the 1980s, and there was one in pretty much every city, every town and city up and down the country. They had these groups. So let's not forget, it's really, really important. And they didn't call themselves things like, no disrespect to these, to these women, because I'm very interested in what they're doing, but they didn't call themselves things like the Pink Ladies, because those kinds of stereotypes of femininity were also things that were thrown off. They didn't call themselves things like damsels in distress. They called them things like angry women, WIMMIN. That's because they didn't want to have the word men within that name. So I just think I'm really concerned that we don't do that, total predictable thing that happens over and over again of reinventing the wheel and forgetting our history, because this is such important history. As I was saying before, the nothing was off limits. I was involved in a panel session earlier talking about things like femininity and masculinity. Well, the women's liberation movement, how much longer have I got? Oh, Jesus. Okay. The women's liberation movement started actually with the Freedom Trash Can. That was one of the first actions that they did in America outside the Miss Universe competition. They got this trash can to demonstrate against the women being, hoarded around like cattle and, voted on by disgusting sexist men as to how large their breasts were and all the rest of it. They got a Freedom Trash Can and chucked in all the symbols of oppression of the time. The girdles, the eyelash curlers, I don't even know what they had in those days, the stiletto heels and all this. But all of these things now are not questioned. I think this is all part of a much wider context of male domination. And we have to understand the fact that a man in this country kills a woman every 3 days, and a partner will kill his partner or former partner once every 5 days. These statistics on horrendous, Mark Rowley just said, 4 million men in this country are under suspicion of perpetrating violence against women. These things all have a context, and we have to look at the big picture and not hold back and not constrain it to a health and safety consideration if we're actually going to fulfil what the women's liberation movement wanted 40 or 50 years ago.
Well done.
Got it off my chest.
Very good. I'll point out only that there's a deliberate question mark after damsels in distress, but take all your points. Right, over to Joan.
I thought the word damsel had died out several generations ago. It's like the word poetess. I think we got past all of that. And I would also challenge the word distress in the title as well, because I don't think women and girls should be distressed about the levels of violence that we suffer. I think we should be angry. I think we should be very angry. And I also don't think that knowing how bad things are, and I do think this is a crisis, I don't think that's a reason to say that's scaremongering or anything like that, because I think women and girls need information. We know now just how many men are committing these kinds of crimes. We know that around 71,000 men in England and Wales there were 71,000 reports of rape in England and Wales last year, and that they're just reports to the police. And we know that maybe 1,500 or 2,000 of those men will be prosecuted and end up convicted. That means that's maybe 70,000 men each year, according to official figures, are committing rape and getting away with it. And we know also that impunity is one of the ways in which crime escalates. So if you look at the history of serial killers and multiple rapists and so on, what happens is they get bolder. And even if a man is called in and he's asked questions and then he's allowed to go, that just makes him feel invincible. And so what the state is actually doing through this failure is creating multiple rapists, serial rapists. And I think that is part of the indictment, which I completely agree with Laila and Julia about. But I think we need women and girls to know how bad things are and to know what they can do about it. And a lot of you will know that I chaired the Mayor of London's Violence Against Women and Girls panel for 8 years. And weirdly, when I was... I actually, in those days, got on quite well with Boris Johnson. And one of the things that we decided to do was publish on the Mayor's Office of Police and Crime website. We published an interactive map of the 32 London boroughs. And the Mayor's Office gets raw data from the Metropolitan Police on a monthly basis. So the Mayor's Office knows by month how many rapes have been committed, how many serious sexual offences, how many domestic violence incidents, how many domestic violence charges have been laid. So there's a massive information there. So what we started to do was to publish that on the Mayor's website. So if you wanted to know, you were about to move somewhere in London, or you come from outside London, or you were worried about your local area, you could actually click on your local borough, and you could choose a category and find out exactly what was happening in terms of crime, right down to ward level. And we thought that was an incredibly important thing to do, to empower women to know what was going on in areas. And it also shows you the patterns across London. So one of the boroughs with the highest levels of domestic abuse are Croydon and Tower Hamlets. The lowest are Merton and Richmond. Now, that's no great surprise. And it tells you about the relationship between crowded populations, deprivation, and so on, families living on top of each other. We thought that was incredibly useful. Sadiq Khan got rid of it. And a lot of you will know. A lot of you will know my history with Sadiq Khan. And weirdly, I never expected this, but I actually found that Conservative administration easier to deal with in terms of violence against women than a Labour one. And you may also, there's no reason why I should know this, but just before the election last year, I resigned from the Labour Party. I don't think we can trust Labour on this issue. Absolutely not. It pains me to say that, because I have been a member of the Labour Party for many years and knocked on doors for any number of candidates. But I think another thing that's happened, and another betrayal by the mainstream parties, is about the trans rights issue, because girls in school are being told that you have to take people as they present themselves. So you may know that this is a man, you may know that your teacher is a man, but he now identifies as a woman. So you've got to call him Miss So-and-so and pretend that you don't believe the evidence of your eyes. Now, one of the things that girls learn as we're growing up is we learn to assess risk. I do a huge amount of walking in the country. If I'm walking on my own and there's nobody around and I see a man coming towards me, I'm immediately doing a risk assessment. How old is he? Does he have a dog with him? Is he on the phone? All of that. If I see a woman, I don't need to do that. Now, if you tell girls that there is a very obvious man in front of them, but he's wearing a wig and he calls himself Susan, and you've got to pretend that too, that's a vast safeguarding risk. So that's another way that but the parties have let us down. So I'll stop there because I think my time is just about up.
Great, wonderful, thank you. Ella.
Thank you. I was looking at some articles 2 days ago and I came across this press release from Cycling UK, which had this information that 60% of women feel their cycle journeys are limited by safety concerns and a lack of suitable infrastructure. And initially I thought, okay, what's cycle lanes, potholes, cycling infrastructure and women not feeling safe. And then it was a very short press release and the next paragraph began, in line with the UK Violence Against Women and Girls strategy, Cycling UK is calling on the government to invest 10% in cycling and walking from their transport budget. It's just completely ludicrous to, the idea that violence against women from a car hitting them is the same as would be included in the UK Violence Against Women strategy, which is about, serious things as domestic abuse, rape, murder, that would be equivalent to breaking your collarbone coming off your bike on a crappy road in Hackney, shows the utter sort of nebulous nature of the discussion about women's safety, violence against women, and also the incredibly cynical way in which women's safety gets used as a kind of gloss for various campaigns and organisations to ask for bits of their budget or get a bit of press. And it's not just a cynical point. I think it's a symbol of what the conversation about women's safety has become, which is this broad, all-encompassing, nebulous, flabby idea that women are always under threat, that in all areas of their life, at home, out on the street, in the shop, walking in the countryside, walking later, wherever it is, that you are constantly under threat. And that is not true. That is just not true. And not only is that not true, it also takes away from a focus on where women are at threat and where things do need to be focused upon. I mean, the greatest, just second to the actual crimes that were perpetrated against those women and girls in the grooming gangs, the next greatest scandal is the fact that the world was, particularly this country, utterly preoccupied with the mundane whinging from middle-class journalists in relation to Me Too and the Westminster scandal, while girls were being ignored for having been, serially raped and abused. And I think that, again, tells you something about the way in which the all-encompassing discussion about women's safety, which all complaints are the same, and everything is unsafe, means that you cannot take the laser focus to where it needs to be. Similarly, when people start throwing statistics around about murder, about rape, when you dial down into where this is actually happening, it's not that every woman is a potential Sarah Everard, as was made after the case of that poor woman's murder, that every woman was a threat when they went out the house and went down to the shops, but that those statistics reveal a very specific problem of abuse perpetrated by men that women know in their own homes. So again, a completely distorted view of how unsafe women should feel was being given to young women. Why is this climate of fear a problem? Why is it something that I, want to get up on a panel of feminists who are talking about, real things about, women feeling unsafe? And why do I want to come and say that's not true? And this is a problem. Not only is it not true, it's a problem for women's liberation and women's freedom. 2 reasons. First of all, this climate of fear, this moral panic, this lunacy, I think in many cases, one, it completely breaks down any possibility of a positive relationship between the sexes. A lot of us in this room in particular have spent the day talking about issues relating to women and girls, men, masculinity, femininity. The idea that women are always unsafe, and particularly always unsafe around men, it's just, good luck ever going on a successful date. Good luck ever meeting someone. I mean, what a completely misanthropic and unreal, positioning of what men and women's relationships are. So way to screw up young people if you want to do that. But probably most importantly, a panic about women's safety is the number one enemy to, never mind the men, a panic about safety is the number one enemy for women's freedom and women's liberation. One of my heroines, Camille Paglia, many of you will be familiar with her work, and this is a very overquoted phrase from her. She wrote about and talked about her own experience living under paternalistic rules at university, and not being allowed to sleep with who she wanted, having to have a curfew, having to have one foot on the floor on the door open policies. She demanded the right to and the freedom to risk rape, because a free sexual life was always going to have the risk of rape, the risk of bad outcomes, the risk of bad people. But the important thing was that risk and freedom are inherently linked and cannot be removed from each other. You cannot be constantly safe. The only people who should and want to be constantly safe are children, and women are not children. We're adults with agency. I think, at the end point, how do we move forward if we don't want to keep repeating as Julia said, the history of talking about violence against women, but nothing ever being done about it? I think, first of all, we have to realize that feminism is in large part for certainly the last 20 years been the main problem, calling for more policy intervention, more laws, more police looking over our shoulders, more stupid Angela posters telling bar staff that they have to come and save us from bad dates. I mean, it's intensely insulting towards women's intelligence, freedom, and, sense of respect. All of that has to be stripped back. No more whinging and about stuff that you don't like about men, and do something about it. Put on the steel toe cap Dr. Martens if you're going out, if you feel unsafe. Actually think about how you talk to men and talk to other women about your sense of self. And, the reason why I actually demanded the phrase, yes, Jacob, sorry, damsels in distress, is because this is what we are being painted as through all of this intervention. It's not some throwback that we lost. It is real right now. If you talk to young women right now, they talk about being afraid at a time in which they have no reason to be. No, a woman on a UK campus going out on a night out has no reason to be afraid. And you can tut if you like. But what we're sacrificing at the altar of safety is women's agency and women's freedom. And as a group of women who might be interested in women's liberation, I think you can do better than that.
Very good. Right, we got a short session. I know the panel will want to come back, but we need to get straight out to the audience. You have to weave in responses to each other in the process of that. Who's got the microphones? Okay, so start at the back. There's a lady there with her hand. We might as well start at the back and we'll try and work our way forward. Okay.
Yeah, so if I understand you correctly, Ella, you're saying that if I identify as safe from male violence, then I will be safe from male violence.
There's someone over there? Yeah, try and get it to them. Great.
Thank you very much, Ella. That was absolutely brilliant. I thought I've just done a study in a Scottish university with Gen Z female students, and a sort of standardised measure of their well-being and also what they thought about things. They have very poor well-being. They feel unsafe all the time. They feel oppressed all the time. They feel absolutely victimised, and they think that more mental health services is the way forward. There's no hint of, I could maybe not conform, I could throw away the eyelash curlers, I could do that. Very little agency, fear, just as you described. Lots and lots of stuff about I'm continually oppressed by the patriarchy and I can't do anything about that. Completely depressing. And I think we've done that to our young women.
Thank you very much. Okay, can you pass it across the aisle? Is there someone on a similar row on the other side of the aisle? No, okay, just pass it to the nearest person. That's great. Cheers. I'll take two more, I think. Yeah, go ahead.
Ella, I completely agree with the risk being an inherent part of freedom. I think you're talking absolute sense there. But when you say we have to stop whinging and do something about it, I'd just love to know what. Because I've got, thinking of two examples. First of all, the Bonnie Blue phenomenon. I just constantly find myself thinking that I can shout and scream at Bonnie Blue all I want, and Jesus, I would really like to. But the fact of the matter is that if men didn't line up in balaclavas and dirty socks in a corridor to fuck her, she would be sat in a room on her own like a gobshite with no one there, no one watching, no money being made, and she'd put on her clothes and go home. So it is we can say, okay, well, Bonnie Blue has the freedom to do that, and she should have the freedom to do that. But it does take the other half of the population not to do it. In addition, things like, the huge debates over this weekend, which I'm so grateful for, about sort of mass immigration, things like this. The constant comeback is, British men rape too. And first of all, you're absolutely right. But if you have a house on fire, the last thing you do is say, okay, well, should we send more fire? Surely you should close the door and put out the current fire. We absolutely, you're right, do have. But the other thing is, yes, the problem is I do find myself thinking then you're absolutely right. And thanks to the men who do fucking rape in this country, we haven't got a leg to stand on. But so stop whinging about it and do what? The reason that I think that's a fantastic point that lady made about, these women feel so cringingly unsafe all the time. They're looking for more and more mental health actives and things like that. Like Andrea Dawkins said, is all we're asking for is 24 hours without rape. Why can't any of you do it? Kind of thing. So if you want us to stop whinging, I would love to know. It's a general, it's not rhetorical question. I would love to know. Stop whinging and do something about it. What can we in this room do about it? Apart from have a go at men, and then we're called misandress, and that we're told about men's loneliness and they want to kill themselves all the time.
Okay.
So
thanks. Okay, pass that along to the other side of the aisle. Then I'm going to get the panel, and then I'll come back out. Okay. So there was someone there. No, have they given up the idea?
There's a lady here.
Okay. Pass it to whoever's closest to you, and then we'll get the panel.
Our daughter's safety, all of our daughter's safety, is being compromised by every agency and every individual who has ever supported trans identification. So my daughter may have already had her breast cut off by some surgeon, and her health severely compromised by huge amounts of testosterone. So that I want to bring into the conversation as well, because it's a huge issue to my daughter's safety in our lives.
Great, thanks. Okay, let's get the panel, and then we'll come back out. So, Laila, can we start with you? Some responses or pick up on something from the other panelists?
You're really testing our memory here. But I don't agree with your colleague said, because what takes women's freedom away is pretending that we're just as safe as men. You can't gaslight, you don't make women free by lying about the inherent risks we face as women. Men are not getting raped. Men are not getting sexually assaulted. You might get a tiny, tiny percentage that is. And you can't blame us for whinging, as you call it. You have to blame the state for not taking the risks that we face seriously. I've prosecuted lots of sexual assaults, and they get off with, suspended sentence, a community order. When I was at the CPS, I spoke to the woman who was running the rape team, and she says, you cannot imagine the amount of sexual assaults and rapes that's happening in London right now. We're talking Uber drivers. So when she said that, I said, so should I fork out for a black cab? She said, no, black cabs are the same. Any party you go to, any colleague. So we're not whinging, we're pointing out the truth. We have a state that says we're whinging. We have a state that does not take the risk that women are going through seriously. And for us to be gaslit into thinking that we're equal, we're not. We're smaller, we're more vulnerable, and we're physically not as strong. And I think it's a really, really dangerous narrative to say that, to state the obvious to everyone. To state the obvious, it's not men that walk around with keys in their hand and a joint fist down a road. In fact, my friend the other day, he said he goes jogging in a dark park. I go, gosh, I'd love to do that at 5 a.m. before work, but I won't. And that's not me whinging. That's me, like the lady said at the end of the table, assessing risk. Women are always assessing risk. If my taxi cab takes a wrong turn, I'm like, oh crap, is he going to kill me? Is he going to take me to sexually assault me? That's not whinging. And the sooner the state recognises, the sooner we will be safer.
Great, thanks.
I think, well, really just to echo what Laila was saying there, I feel, Ella, that you've actually presented some quite sort of straw woman arguments. You've been putting words in our mouth like, oh, we just never feel safe under any circumstances. I don't think anyone is saying that. But when you talk about there's always risk inherent in freedom, and you're talking in the frame of sexual freedom, as Laila was saying, it's a completely asymmetric situation, because if a man and a woman, or a young man and a woman, go on a date from online dating, he does not have to worry that she's going to strangle him if they end up having sex that night. Whereas that is a very real concern of hers. That, like, we know the statistics. There's the woman in Canada, I think, who's done research on this. The normalization from, we haven't even got onto pornography yet, that the normalization of violence against women, sexual violence against women from pornography, has had very, very real effects. And so we know that strangulation, sexual choking, other forms of violence against women have become norms of heterosexual practice now. So it's a very real risk that a woman is taken anytime she sleeps with a man that she doesn't know, or in fact one that she does know, is that she could be sexually assaulted or violated within that context. So when we're talking about risks and freedoms, it's completely asymmetrical for women and men. And speaking of asymmetry, there is not a global online industry dedicated to the sexual degradation of men in the way that men have created a global industry that is accessible. It's immediately accessible. It's ubiquitous, and it's having real effects. It's violence against those women that are in the pornography, and it's also having effects on women who are having to live with the effects of it. So yeah. Anyway, I think this. Yeah, please.
Just quickly, what we don't realize is that there is a rape epidemic happening in our country. And according to police recorded data, up to 1 million rapes are not recorded by the police because women don't call the police about it. All the time. Rape is going up, and people might say that I always talk about illegal migrants or migrants. It is going up substantially by a few nations that we have allowed into this country that do not think that women are equal, and that risk must be recognised.
Right. Okay. You had your fill, yeah.
Sorry.
All right, Ella.
You just keep ramping it up, like, and the moral what does a moral panic or a sort of an intense sense of unsafety do to a young woman? I'm not at all here trying to deny that there aren't realities of differences between men and women, power differences in the sexual arena, in public life or whatever. But aside, what happens when you say to a young woman, you need to carry your keys in your fist when you're walking. You need to make a risk assessment of every man that walks in front of you. You need to expect that every man that you meet in your workplace is going to be, blah, 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 blah. What happens to that woman?
She's safe.
It doesn't happen. Okay, she's safe, but she is not free. She might think she's safe, but she's not free, because that is a burden. That is a burden that she does not have to carry. And particularly what that does to young women is it stops them from going out. It stops them from going and having casual sex, which, by the way, I think is probably a good thing to do when you're young because it's fun and normal. It stops them from thinking of themselves as agents who can make change in the world. And the reason why this is the complicated point, and it's hard to make this point because you sound like you're victim blaming women, and I hope I don't, and I don't want to sound like that because I don't believe that. When men perpetrate violence against women, why are they doing it, and what are they doing it for? Some of them it's just for kicks, but most of the time it's because they have a view of women of being damsels in distress, of being lesser than them, of being weaker. Yes, okay, physically maybe some of us are, but I mean, you should see my husband, he's a lot smaller than me. But that there's a sense that they are weaker and less than and able to be trodden on. And then we come along and say, you are. You are weaker. You are less than. You do need the policeman looking over your shoulder. You do need daddy in the form of a politician or a law or something like that to constantly be watching you. And then what happens is it's a self-perpetuating thing. If we actually want to do something about the very real issue of violence against women and women's equality, then we need to start asserting that women not only are equal, but are powerful, should not live in fear, should live as agents of their own destiny. And yes, there's a reality. I've got a daughter. I'm not going to, when she comes of age, tell her that she should go down a dark alley with headphones blasting in her ear. I'm not trying to deny reality. I'm not either trying to say to individual women that you have to just deal with it or identify as safe. Well, that's a ridiculous concept. That's not what I'm arguing at all. What I am arguing is that we start changing the narrative around women and stop arguing for safety and start arguing for freedom, because those things are very different. And freedom requires personal responsibility. That doesn't mean, checking what you wear before you go out. That means a serious thing about taking control of discussions about women's freedom and women's place in society. But it also means to come to the whinging point. And this is important. Whinging about, nobody whinges about being raped. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about, for example, during the Me Too era, when I was watching all this stuff unfold on Twitter, I remember a woman tweeting saying, "I'm in tears because the other day I opened the door to the postman and he looked down at my feet and said I had beautiful feet because I just had a manicure. And how dare he sexually, degrade me in my own home."
That's not what we're talking about now.
Be quiet. I'm speaking now. This is what was happening in relation to the Me Too movement. There was a great conflation of whinging crap alongside of women who just wanted to be treated like princesses, alongside very serious issues of rape and violence. If we stop the whinging, we can start focusing on the real stuff, but also we can start taking ourselves seriously as women and agents.
Okay, Joan.
I'm not sure whether this is confusion or caricature or both, but it's probably both, I think. So if we actually, there seems to be a logical problem here, because if you're saying that women have got to be free and it takes away their freedom, if we tell them that some men are dangerous, then women don't know what they need to do to reduce that risk. So presumably they all go out there and, do all these things and they enjoy the sense of freedom, and then they get beaten to almost death. And then they go to the state and the state lets them down, because I'm very, very impressed by Laila's points on this. So if some of you will be aware of a project called Operation Bluestone Soteria, which is a Home Office project, and that's an ongoing project looking at the way the police handle rape. And the initial findings were absolutely astonishing, because they were showing that in the Met, around 50% of the police officers that they interviewed didn't believe that women were being raped. It's all, it's regretful sex. It's changing their minds. They're embarrassed because they got drunk and so all of that. And I have, because I've been writing about rape for about 30 years now, people always say, it's his word against hers. This is actually not true. So there's actually quite a lot of evidence available now, particularly in terms of CCTV, looking at the man who is accused, looking at his phone to see if he's discussed it with friends and so on. Now, we got into this situation a few years ago where women who'd been raped, staggering into a police station at 2:00 in the morning, were presented with a form where they were asked to sign over their rights to privacy, so that they were asked to show their school reports, their work reports, their computers. They would hand over their phones, sometimes for months at a time. And I remember a chief superintendent coming to the Vorg board and saying to me, if one of my detectives is investigating a rape, he has to get permission from a senior officer to look at 24 hours of the data on the phone of someone who's accused of rape, whereas we can take a woman's phone and hang on to it for about a year. So what was happening, and one of the reasons we're in this terrible situation, is that the criminal justice system has investigated the women. The victims are not the perpetrators. So if you take this Ella's argument, then all of that is fine, because women should be able to deal with it ourselves. This is actually about it's being massive. I'm speaking now. Thank you.
Fair enough.
So I don't see anything that she's saying that actually, it's all woolly about, women should take power, etc. Well, how do you do that when the state is letting you down?
Okay, great, right. So apologies to the panel, because you can see there are loads of hands, and I want to get as many people in. You can see there are loads of hands, so I'm going to take quite a few questions. So do jot them down if you've got someone to jot them down, but it means we're going to hand the floor over to the audience. Right. I can't see where the microphones are, I can only see them.
I've got it. Right. Okay. First of all, there's often a confusion about whether all men are rapists as opposed to all men are potential rapists. That's often a confusion. So that's the first thing I want to clear up. All men are not rapists. All men are potential rapists. That's something we need to bear in mind. And also, secondly, we talk about the sense of entitlement. It's not just about the sense of entitlement that men have. It's the sense of entitlement that many people feel that men have about women. So it's entitlement to our time, our space, and to our bodies. It's very hard to negotiate with someone when you've got that sense of entitlement. Oh, you went back to his place, did you? Well, what did you expect? He's entitled to fuck you, isn't he? And sometimes the sense of entitlement is only, it leads to, he does his risk assessment then. I'm entitled to have sex with this woman. Is she going to be able to talk back? Is she going to be able to fight back? We talk about women and our risk assessments. What about men and their risk assessments? Is this woman going to be believed? Is this woman going to be able to fight back? So there are two things I wanted to say. Thank you.
Very good. Okay.
A question addressed to Laila. Laila, you talked about how reform are going to be the countercultural that's going to sort of sort everything out. But I think many women in the room will be quite nervous to hear the prison policy that's been suggested by Farage, which was on a case-by-case basis. Considering we've already won our rights in the Supreme Court victory, which we're struggling to get, how can we trust a reform government when they don't get it? I'm sorry, I'm not sure they get it, and I think I'm really concerned about the woman that's advising him on his prison policy. And can you give us any assurances as to whether or not the party's going to get a handle on it and which women are talking to him? I think Julia Long would make a great advisor if Reform are looking for someone.
Okay.
But yeah, is this something that you're concerned about? And are the women in Reform having a word and trying to get the right policies in place so that we can, the TERFs can vote for him, essentially?
Okay, here's what's going to happen. You pass that microphone to the lady next to you.
I've been on a few panels and talking on the issue of online dating and the issue of the war between the sexes. And I think what I kind of want to bring up on to kind of give Ella a bit of a backing in this is that what she's saying partially is that the narratives around women's safety and the fear of men is not conducive to women or to relationships between men and women. Online date, like people talking about Gen Z dating are very concerned about the fact that they're unable to communicate with each other. They're often quite scared to approach each other. And this, I was talking to, Elliot Buick was on the panel, on both of those panels, and he was saying that not only is it kind of damaging for women in their ability to kind of trust men in any capacity, which is an issue if you genuinely want a communication. If you can't trust them at all, they're never going to be able to communicate. But also for young men who are then developing either a victim complex because they feel like they can't talk to young women and then they get more frustrated. No, and that's annoying to me as well, that they shouldn't have a victim complex because they shouldn't be the victims, but they're developing one because they feel like they can't communicate with women because they're shutting down. And then the other thing I wanted to say about the Uber driver that came up on the panel, just really quickly, is I completely get, without sounding like a wet wipe myself, is that I got so anxious when I moved to Birmingham about getting an Uber by myself. Not because it was Birmingham, because I was from Faversham, so it was more like a completely different situation. But I was so anxious that I was like, had to call people, and I was so ashamed of myself because I was like, I should be able to get in an Uber by myself and not feel scared. And I don't think if I had stopped going in Ubers, if I had given in to being scared, then I would be more limited in my capacity to do what I needed to do as an individual to get about my life. And I'm not saying that bad things don't happen, but I think perpetuating that narrative is not going to allow women to be able to do what they need to do by themselves. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Okay, so there's the lady at the back. Sorry, I realise I'm making it hard for the cameraman. Can you pass that microphone to this lady at the front? Yeah, okay, there's someone at the back who has a microphone right now who will speak.
Okay. So this is to respond to Ella's earlier points. Probably all movements experience overcorrection as a byproduct of change. And I think that might be what's happened here with your arguments. I agree with you that not all women are unsafe all the time and that this narrative has perhaps been stretched too far. However, your beliefs that you've just outlined are in themselves an example of reactionary overcorrection at the expense of reality and rationality. They are a simplified counterattack on the movement of awareness about violence against women. Also, by the way, I don't agree with you when you say that all women want casual sex at the risk of maybe being raped here and there, and that it's just a given that everyone should want that and that women should want that. That's actually an ideology that's being pushed, and you don't speak for all women.
Okay, good. So you're past. There's a lady who's also standing up at the back who's had a hand up for a while. Lady standing at the back with has had a hand up for literally the whole time, so her arm must be hurting. In the mean, can we just, for the cameraman, can I just take her and then he'll come back to you? Is that okay? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so I just want to add, like, when I was 13, I did walk around with sort of keys in my hands, and I was in Copenhagen, which I think is probably the safest city in Europe. And it wasn't, I kind of, this was definitely not conducive to me understanding what the issues women face were. I was not under any threat. I should have been taking the bus on my own. I was, and I learned to do so. And I wonder also, in universities, we have sort of policies that aren't talking about the legal problem of rape, but they are mediating the sort of social dynamics of the university. So you have dignity, respect, and consent services. You have administrative bodies that come in and regulate student lives in cases where no crime has been committed. This is kind of how they operate. And I often feel like these kinds of procedures, which is where women go first if they are in the university, and I think if you are, a woman where no crime has been committed, I think this tells you that that something has happened to you that it hasn't. But also, I think this downplays what the distinction is between those awkward encounters that women will have in universities and that will happen when you're having casual sex, and then the things that should be going to the police. And this leads to a conflation, which I think can mean that the police take women less seriously. Because if you have this, statistics come out in my university that a third of women on campus will be raped in their time there, which is just not true. And I think this is not at all conducive to young women sort of understanding the situation that they're in and tackling the real problems that there are.
Great, thanks. Okay, so we'll have this lady at the front that, as a panel, you can see I've got too many hands to take. I'm just going to keep taking as many people, and then I'll give you like 2 minutes or so at the end to wrap up. It's just otherwise it's going to be impossible to get everyone who wants to speak. Go ahead. Yeah.
I think things have got better for young women in some ways. My daughter is 31 now and told me two amazing facts. Apparently, when she was younger and dating men, she used to ask them out. She didn't wait to be asked if she liked a guy. She asked him out, and she had 2 long relationships like that. She also told me she'd never had unprotected sex. For someone of my generation, that's incredible. I have a very, very positive suggestion to make, because we're all in danger of spending all our time defining the problem and not looking at solutions. I think there's one solution we could consider, which would be on a voluntary basis for all the lovely men like the ones here and the ones that would never rape anybody and the ones like my son who would be terrified of his mother if he got into any trouble like that. We need a universal male DNA database. We need it now. We need it so that all the good guys who would never, ever dream of pushing their luck or giving way to their violent impulses or thinking, well, I'm a lot stronger and well, she's not her. We know this goes on all the time. We need a universal male DNA database. We need lots of volunteers to get it started. We need it to be mandatory for people in certain services like the police. We need it to be mandatory for people intending to immigrate to this country. In times of COVID, you could have it mandatory for anyone coming into this country at all.
Okay, yes.
And women could do it too. I volunteer. I'll be the first.
I do not.
Okay, that microphone, keep it at there's like 2, first this gentleman and then the lady behind him. Okay, so I'm trying not to make your life too difficult and making you run around. So take this gentleman, then we're going to come to the back because there's a lady at the back. We're going to try and get this cluster of hands in over there. This panel, I'm sorry, but it's all about the audience here.
just as a disabled man, can I just say sympathetically to Ella, please, the greatest risk of being a disabled person is that you internalize the very attitudes that you're trying to fight against. And so, please, if I ever, because I wanted to be independent, didn't ask for help, I'd end up more disabled than I am now. So we live in an interdependent world, not an independent world, and we need the social structures to make sure we're safe. But on that, in an ableist, misogynistic, and homophobic society, what can I ask each of the panelists to redefine safeguarding and what it should mean? Because we've lost the concept, so we need to redefine it and understand it, so that we can all be safe, and that I, as a man, can support every woman I know to live the autonomous and free life that we all deserve.
Great, very good. Okay, we're going to the back now. I think that's who is there? Someone else at the front who wanted to speak? Okay.
Hi, my name's Maeve. I'm 22, so I'm one of the young women that I guess are being talked about, and we're talked about a lot, especially within circles of, with all due respect, older women. And what interests me is the fact that being a young woman, make no mistake, I'll be, mouthy as they come, and I'm sick of feeling or being told that I should feel unsafe, and I kind of refuse to. So I relate to a lot of what Ella's saying, but at the same time, I agree with a lot of what the other panelists have said. So I do think it's an attitude thing, but a lot of that does come down to sort of nature. Like if you're somebody that's able to be a bit less caring about the risks of social ostracization or being, people attempting to shout you down, if you're somebody that backs your voice a bit more, then fine, it's easier to sort of make statements and live a certain way and reject this idea that you should feel scared. But for other women, it can come down to personality. If you're not somebody who's really, really willing to be kind of bolshy like that, then yeah, maybe you will approach things differently and you're a bit more susceptible to a narrative that you should feel scared. The only thing I did want to say is that young women are increasingly being told that, we're only allowed to be political through this lens of being kind, which actually isn't very political at all. I'm not saying that you have to, I'm not saying that, more young women should be right-wing or whatever. They should have the freedom to be able to actually develop political beliefs. And I think a big way that they should be able to do that is having cross-generational conversations. And funnily enough, especially through being gender critical, I think that's going to be something that really, really unites women across generations and allows young women to actually be political instead of feeling they should be scared or feeling they should be kind. Thanks.
Very good. Okay, pass it along. We'll stay there for the purposes of mine. Yeah, so, okay, yeah, go ahead.
Hi, Ella, your comments are reminding me a little bit of a talk I went to a couple of weeks ago in Dublin. It was an assistant professor of history, I think, at Trinity College, and it was part of the Dublin Festival of History, and he talked about how women who don't want trans identified men in their toilets are like the old racists of bygone Americans. I'm just wondering, you're kind of essentially saying that we're overreacting. We don't need spaces that are just for women, that we don't need to be on guard. We don't need to protect ourselves. So yeah, it was very gaslighty, and what you're saying is just kind of reminding me of that.
Cool. And there was someone next to you, I think, wanted to speak, so let's keep the microphone up there.
Right. Well, I come from another country, and a country which has had some pretty irresponsible politics, in Germany, that is. A lot of immigration and a lot of danger. But I don't actually relate to your points, Laila, so much, because I think surely the problems we have, by the way, the open border policies were made by women as well as by men in our country. But surely the problems we have relate to the entire population. So we've put men as much at risk as women. So we have knife crimes of which men are as much affected. And the other side is that whenever we do have an attack, there's always very, very brave men who come to the aid of the innocent people who are being attacked. So we've had tremendous courage shown, especially by men, also when women were attacked, stopping attackers. And so I think putting up the sexes against each other is not going to help us build an opposition to our elite policies which have made such mistakes. I do think we need to pull the same string, and I do think it's a little bit dangerous to say there's only women who are victims and men who are the perpetrators.
Very good. Okay, what I'm going to do, I've got room, I think, for 3 more people. So there's 2 people at the front, and then I'm going to take, if there's only those 2 hands, I'll take you 2 as well. So I'm going to take 4 more people in total. That'll give the panel 2.5 minutes each to do an impossible job of summing up.
Okay, 2 contradictory things. I have to walk every day, and I walk the main streets of Tottenham at night. and fuck them, really. Also, I'm old, so I'm invisible. But I only walk on the high road, and sadly, I see loads of people out, but they're not people, they're men. I just wish more women would actually come out at night, so there's more than one of me. But yeah, so far, and I do carry an alarm in my pocket. I'm just a bit wimpy like that. Never had to use it, and I do have to walk. The other thing is, in terms of risk and people realising what risk is, there's one sentence, I think, and I can't remember who said it, that encapsulates the risk about the differences between women and men, which is that most men can kill a woman with their bare hands. Hardly any woman could do that. And that's something you have to keep in mind.
Great, thanks. Pass that microphone next to you. Yeah, great.
It's an awful lot of hysteria. I'm not allowed to use that word because it's a male word or something, but about male violence. And I also think there's a lot of dishonesty on the panel about, well, let's start with the women's movement. I mean, I remember the women-only conferences, and I remember the phrase, the person is political, and the way that feminism wasn't united because the person is political led to identity politics. We were fighting with each other at that time in the women's conferences, and also it led to invitations for the state to come into people's private relations, people's family lives, and that hasn't worked out well. And we have had 50 years of feminism and identity politics and these kinds of invitations of the state into our to work out our personal relations for us, and that has not worked out very well. So what are we saying? We're saying that we're facing an eternity of never being able to have relations between the sexes. We're saying that we can never turn to men to fight for women's safety in public places, because my experience is that we can, and where we have, men have stood up and stood alongside women and been allies.
Great. Okay, so there's two people at the back. Yeah, so there's the gentleman with glasses, and there's a lady in, I think, a flowery top or something. But anyway, the gentleman first. Go ahead.
Just so when the Sarah Everard situation happened, there was a whole debate about these kind of issues of sexual abuse. And I put up on social media, look, if there's any girl I know who needs me to walk them home from the pub, for example, if they feel unsafe, please let me know. And a few girls I knew said, thank you very much for that. Here's my experience. The experiences that they told me were, they're in the pub or in the club or something like that, and this guy just comes up and he's saying very lewd things to her, or she's or try to feel her up, basically. And their theory was, so many fellas have been corrupted, affected by the pornography they were exposed to when they were younger and the sexual culture that's around them, that this is what's going to happen. So I'm going to suggest something controversial, which is, to second and third wave feminists, I think this is partly your fault. You're the people who said that basically female sexuality should join male sexuality in being promiscuous and effectively really irresponsible. And it's led to the sexual culture that we have now. I'm not blaming you for that fully, but I am saying that this is all our responsibility. The culture that we have, which is the sexual culture we have, is so unbelievably stupidly irresponsible that it's led to this situation. So maybe taking stock and saying, maybe returning to a culture that is more responsible would be a good idea.
Okay, you're a braver man than me, right? The next, but this lady's last, and then we're going to run down the panel for some closing thoughts.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. I actually think in a society, attitudes towards women come from the top, from the establishment. And the fact that we have had the rape gangs going on for several decades, with the establishment turning a blind eye to that, including Conservative and Labour governments, and the fact that all of these small boats coming over for at least the past 5 years now, in increasing numbers of undocumented young men with foreign values who don't, many of whom don't share our British values towards women, the fact that that hasn't been called a national emergency for emergency legislation to be undertaken to stop it says a lot about what our establishment thinks about women and girls.
Great, thank you. Okay, Thanks to all the wonderful contributions from the audience. Apologies tremendously to the panel for not having enough time to bring you all back in, but I'll give you all about 2.5 minutes now to sum up. We'll do this in the order in which we spoke, which means that it's Laila first, then Julia.
So I'll address the two questions addressed to me first. Men do not belong in a women's prison or any women's space. We are unequivocal about that. A man in a wig, a rapist in a wig, is still a man, and he's still a danger. And we'll be clear, what the lady said, Vanessa Frake, was her own opinion, and it does not represent any kind of reform policy. And if you actually listen to what Nigel said after, he was unequivocal about it. In terms of another lady who said that I've ignored the men's risk, well, number one, it's a talk about women, but that's why I didn't mention it. We don't have to bring men into everything, but actually I've spoken about it many times before. My son was a victim of knife crime. You know, he was mugged at knife point and kidnapped for 10 minutes until his phone cleared. I'm not going to ignore knife crime. In fact, I think that the dialogue does focus a lot of women and girls and does not focus enough on our young boys that are subjected to knife crime on a daily basis. And that is a massive state failure, but that's for another talk. And in terms of that very brave gentleman who just got up, I salute you, sir. But I do think, and I will disagree with the lady, I'm old-fashioned and I do think that sex should mean something. And I do think we need to go back to a sort of self-respect, because I don't want to pretend that sex doesn't mean anything. And when you do that, I think it does expose women to all kinds of emotional trauma, because we're not the same as men. We're not. And there's no point in pretending we are. This whole conversation has been about we're not. But I just want to, we've talked a lot about rape and sexual abuse, but we haven't spoken about sometimes what leads to it. And that's pattern-based offences that women are subjected to, controlling and coercive behaviour that's completely ignored by the state. And the police tend to sometimes treat it as a relationship issue. But it's when a man controls who you speak to, what you wear, how you spend it. And this is a lot more pervasive than sexual assaults or rapes, sadly. And the threshold to prosecute this is serious effect on the victim. But that's very difficult to prove. So it goes completely unprosecuted. And I'd like to see that changed, because it's insidious, it's invisible, and it's very hard to prove. And that's why the abusers choose it. And that's mainly what it starts with. Because once you get control and coercive behavior on your partner, that's when the sexual assaults begin. That's when the sexual abuse begins. And it's not women doing it, it's men.
Thank you, Laila. Very good. Julia, likewise, 2.5 minutes or so.
Thank you. I'm starting to feel slightly over full up with all the words that have been put into my mouth in the course of this panel. So by maybe one of my other panelists and some of the comments from the floor. So I just want to say to the young woman who's speaking before, I can't see if she's still here. No one's telling you to feel. No one's here saying, "Oh, go out and feel unsafe." But by the time it's not, I think it's a bit of shooting the messenger. What we're pointing out is there's something that's very real and very demonstrable, and most of the women in the room have had experience of, is male violence, sexual harassment, things like that. No one's telling you how to feel, but we're pointing out that this is a reality that we live with. And I can't see the young woman now, but just judging from sort of the kind of age you look, I would say, like, when I was young, if I can remember that far back, I was actually extremely irresponsible. I went hitchhiking, I did all kinds of things. I look back now and think, oh, bloody hell, I was really at risk. But actually, by the time I was your age, I'd been flashed at. I'd had men expose themselves to me 4 times. I'd been groped between my legs on the tube as I got off when I was 16. What was the other thing? I'd have been cornered by a bloke who got off his motorbike and accosted me, and I had to run, and I was petrified. So these are the realities. No one's telling you how to feel about it, but we're talking about the realities of it. And it actually, as someone who's, like Laila, with her experience of, being a prosecutor, I've got quite extensive experience and quite a long time experience now working at the high risk, the multi-agency risk assessment conference for women not just at risk of domestic violence, at risk of hospitalisation or death from a male partner or family member. I've done support work for women, in domestic violence agencies, and I'm really actually quite sick and upset. Not upset. I'm not a damsel in distress. I'm quite angry, as Joan rightly said, we have to feel angry at the trivialisation of the reality that I've heard account after account after account of the kind of coercive control that Laila was talking about. And I think we really want to be a bit more thoughtful before some of us trivialise it. And as for that gentleman at the back who basically blamed women for the whole sexualisation of society and our own sexual objectification, I don't think it was us that were, inventing the porn industry and profiting to the tune of billions from the porn industry. Sheila Jeffreys wrote a book critiquing the sexual revolution, again, like probably 30 or 40 years ago now. Second wave feminists have been active in campaigning against the sex industry, against prostitution. And before I finish, very, very quickly, if we're talking about solutions, I do not, I'm afraid, trust the state to do anything particularly marvellous in this regard. But I really want to make a plea, well, not a plea, an assertion, a powerful assertion of the power of women-only spaces, because we tend to talk about women-only spaces in terms of the toilets, the changing rooms, all of this. But women-only spaces are also where we can feel safe, where we can feel the freedom that we can only experience when we truly feel safety. The Michigan Women's Music Festival, I've got a friend who went to the Michigan Women's Music Festival very quickly, about 10 years ago. And I remember when she came back, another friend said to me, she came back walking taller, like noticeably taller than before she'd gone. So the Red Roses, the Lionesses, isn't it fantastic to see women's collectivity, the joy and euphoria that can come when we have women-only sports, women-only spaces. So I think that is the way to go.
Joan.
When I was a young journalist, I was sexually assaulted 3 times at work. They weren't terrible. I dealt with them. But at the same time, I was one of the few women who was involved in the Yorkshire Ripper investigation. And I interviewed 3 women who'd been attacked by Peter Sutcliffe on the way home and received life-threatening injuries, which they did, in fact, survive. And 2 out of the 3 had been walking home. One of them was walking home from the pub. They thought that they were okay walking around little Yorkshire towns like Halifax, and they weren't. Now, it wasn't a moral panic or any kind of panic to tell women at that point that there was something horrible going on and that we were at risk. What was wrong was the police reaction, which was to say women should stay home in the evenings. I mean, nobody ever tells men that they should stay home in the evenings. But I think there is a difference between being clear with women and girls, and particularly I'm talking about girls at school, about the kind of risks that might be out there and what they can do to mitigate them. And I challenge the idea that safety and being free are different things, because if you're not safe, if you're constantly threatened, how can you be free?
Thank you very much. Ella, wrap it up.
Yeah, very briefly on the trans thing. Listen, look, I'm not gaslighting you. I'm just disagreeing with you. There's a difference. And on the trans thing, I wholly agree with Julia. For me, the appeal of women-only spaces, be it toilets or wherever else, it's not primarily about safety or about dodgy guys. It's because I want to only pick my nose around other women. I want some privacy. I want the camaraderie of other women, and particularly actually if you have children, that becomes an intensely valuable and wonderful space that I've continued to enjoy and will defend to the death. So for me, I think there's been a slight problem, which is that a huge amount of the discussion around trans and criticism of trans ideology has been framed around a kind of issue of safety, when actually, for most people, most of the time, it's much more complex and broader than that. So that's that. Look, we're not the same as men, obviously, but we should be free to do the same things as men with the same sense of freedom. And my great concern, the thing that keeps me up at night when I think about this issue, is that the way in which we talk about women's safety today, and I suppose I mean this on a sort of policy government level, the way in which every politician always says, of course I care about violence against women and girls, and we should make misogyny a hate crime, or we should, send out joggers to try and, find out who's jogging without lights on, all this kind of stuff. It's all about saying, what more state intervention do we need? The state is hostile. The state does not care about women's freedom. It's not our friend. It's not our brother. It's not our father. It is it's an enemy I think in many ways. If you look at all the various scandals that have happened over the years, or the inadequacies that the state continue to perpetuate, why would you want more intervention from the state into your personal life as a woman? Why would that make you feel more free? The reason why I brought up things like, the reason why I brought up at the start the difference between where the statistics show that women really are being harmed, which is in relation to domestic violence, which I think it's fair to say we haven't really focused on today. We've mainly focused on the sense of women feeling unsafe when they go out at night. The reason why it's so important to be focused on that is because that is a different conversation from a young woman feeling like she can't walk home from the pub on her own. And the reason why it's important to make those differences is because we can say to women that for the most part, in the 2025, in a country like the UK, you are going to be all right. Go out, have fun, have lots of casual sex, please. It's really good. Oh, okay, there's prudes in the audience, whatever. I think we are stopping telling women from having fun. I think it really boils down to that. The reason why my book is called Fun, Freedom and an End to Feminism, and actually if you make it to the last paragraph, it's a call for women's liberation. The reason why I put fun in the title is because there is a real miserablest tone to all of this, which is really unattractive to young women and detrimental to our freedom. Safety and freedom are different. We need to start talking sensibly in an adult way about agency, risk, autonomy, and how that creates liberation.
Thank you, Ella. All right, thanks so much to the panel.